I declare open the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging and call to order its first meeting. I extend a warm welcome to all of you and acknowledge the presence here today of the President of the General Assembly. I invite the Open-Ended Working Group to consider Agenda Item 1, Election of Officers, in order to elect the Bureau of the Open-Ended Working Group. In accordance with Rule 103 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly, the Open-Ended Working Group shall elect a chair, one or more vice chairs, and a rapporteur. In this regard, the delegations will recall that at the first meeting of its 9th session, held on 23 July 2018, the Open-Ended Working Group elected Ms. Rosany Bifanco, Philippines, as Vice Chair from the Asia-Pacific Group, and Ms. Renee Abi from Ghana from the Africa Group as Rapporteur. For the 11th session, the nomination of Her Excellency Maria del Carmen Squef of Argentina to serve as Chair of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging has been received. May I take it that the Open-Ended Working Group wishes to elect, by acclamation, Her Excellency Maria del Carmen Squef of Argentina as Chair of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging? I hear no objection. It is so decided. On behalf of the working group, I would like to extend my warmest congratulations to Her Excellency Maria del Carmen Squef of Argentina on her election. We will now proceed to the opening segment. I invite the Chair to deliver her opening remarks.
President of the General Assembly, Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Excellencies, colleagues, friends. Firstly, I would like to thank the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Volkan Bozkır, and the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Madam Ilse Brands-Keris, for joining us at this opening ceremony today of the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging of the United Nations. Before beginning, I would like to extend I'd like to be clear with you. I'm being told that there are 30 delegates that are missing from the quorum. We're meeting without those 30 delegates, and I'd like the room to know that. The legal department has told my colleagues from the embassy that we can still function in this way, and that's why I'm now delivering the speech as I am. I'd also like to begin this session by extending warm and affectionate greetings to older persons throughout the world who have been one of the groups that have suffered most from the terrible consequences brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, and who are the protagonists of all of the work that we have been doing since the establishment in 2010 of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. It is an honor and indeed a great responsibility for me to chair this 11th session of the working group, which undoubtedly will be a very special session, not only because of the 30 colleagues that are not here, but fundamentally because of the situation for older persons. The commitment of the Argentine Republic to the defense, promotion and protection of human rights of older persons goes back a long way. 73 years ago, on the 28th of August 1948, Eva Duarte de Perón, Argentine political leader, a tireless defender of the rights of the most vulnerable, proclaimed in my country the Declaration for Old Age, which enshrined a set of rights for older persons. In November of that same year, at the third session of the Third Committee of the General Assembly of the United Nations, which took place in Paris, the Argentine delegation presented a draft resolution which included the Declaration on the Rights of Old Age. On the 4th of December of 1948, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 213, through which it decided to submit to the Economic and Social Council a draft declaration on the rights of old age, submitted by the delegation of Argentina for its examination and consideration for later presentation of a report to the General Assembly. Since that historic moment, Argentina has worked tirelessly, nationally and internationally, for the defense, promotion and protection of the rights of adults and older persons. On the 21st of December 2010, the General Assembly decided, and I quote, to establish an open-ended working group with the aim of increasing the protection of the human rights of older persons, examining the international framework in force in the area of the human rights of older persons, and determining its possible shortcomings and the best way to remedy these, including through a study, if appropriate, of the viability of new instruments and measures. In 2020, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the creation of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. Nevertheless, we were not able to celebrate that anniversary or hold the 11th session of the working group. In fact, 2020 was the year when the entire world was struck by the COVID-19 pandemic, and this is still the case today. Indeed, the pandemic has had a devastating impact on the life of older persons. According to the WHO, by the 1st of March 2021, so we're talking about this month that's just coming to an end, 71% of those that lost their lives due to COVID-19 were over 65 years old. In other words, 7 out of every 10 of COVID-19 cases were older people over 65 years. The pandemic took with it so many lives. We've experienced so much pain at the loss of our grandfathers, grandmothers, fathers, mothers, friends. But the pandemic has also called into question the legitimacy of a system, laying bare its insufficiency. The pandemic has taken with it companies, jobs, entire economies. It's exacerbated and laid bare the problem of inequality, injustice, poverty, the unjust and unfair conditions between countries and within countries. The hard reality of this crisis is that it's laid bare discrimination based on age, the lack of protection and social inclusion and access to health services, the lack of independence and participation of older persons in decision-making processes, and also the increase in violence and the abandonment and abuse suffered by older persons. The pandemic has shone a light on the most vulnerable, those that have been most forgotten. This is why we reiterate that this is not just another open-ended working group. We are here at a session that could be a turning point. After the pandemic, nothing will be the same as it was before. After the pandemic, nothing can or should be the same. Ladies and gentlemen, we are meeting here to begin the 11th session, which will have an important agenda of activities where we will address crucial items of importance and think about the great challenges that we face in order to ensure the full enjoyment of human rights for all older persons. I hope I can count on your participation. As I indicated at the beginning, this will be a very special session. We have the responsibility in this session for the working group to address the great current and future changes in a practical and concrete manner, which will make it possible to move towards full protection of human rights for all older persons. Today, at this first meeting, we will begin the general discussion, which will continue this afternoon. On Tuesday in the morning, I will have the honour of chairing the session and moderating the high-level panel on COVID-19 and older persons. There we will have the presence of senior leaders who will reflect from an interregional and diverse point of view on the effects of the pandemic on older persons throughout the world. Also, we will have the opportunity to listen to the voices of all stakeholders in the interactive dialogue that will take place during that panel. At the session in the afternoon of Tuesday the 30th, we will begin looking at the priority areas that we discussed during the 10th session, considering the contributions made by member states, focusing on legislation in the areas of education, training, lifelong learning and capacity building, and also social protection and social security. On Wednesday the 31st, we'll deal with the priority areas of this session. In the morning, we'll deal with the right to work and access to the labour market, and in the afternoon, we will discuss access to justice. In all of the panels, we'll have the honour to have the participation of very good experts and authorities, which will enable us to have fruitful discussions from an interregional and multi-sectoral approach. And these will enrich our exchanges at every session. And finally, on Thursday, the 1st of April, in the morning, we will discuss the way ahead. We'll debate the great challenges before us and reflect on the best ways to address them. In the afternoon, we will have the closing segment of the 11th session. In the open-ended working group on ageing, the participation of all relevant stakeholders has been and will be fundamental to the activity of the session. Although this hybrid format does have its limitations, nevertheless, it does guarantee inclusive participation of diverse stakeholders wherever they may be through the virtual platforms. We hope that all planned sessions will be enriching with active participation, inclusive and diverse, and including all stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not been easy to organize this session, and here I'd like to thank the Secretariat, DGACM, DESA, for their strong commitment and professionalism in this process. Allow me also to highlight the work of the Working Group Bureau, Rosny Fango, Philippines, Svela Kozia, Slovenia, Stefano Guerra, Portugal, and Renia Ghana. This session would not have been possible without their support. Today, 10 years since the creation of the open-ended working group on ageing, we have the opportunity to make history. Just as 10 years ago the creation of this working group created a milestone, today we have the great responsibility to rethink and reimagine a post-pandemic era, which will make it possible to move towards societies that are more just, inclusive, resilient, and equal, and not leave anyone behind. We are facing a decisive moment which requires immediate and specific concrete action in order to build back better, adopting an approach based on human rights, which will take as its priority the most forgotten, the most vulnerable. A building back which includes and listens to the voices of older persons in order to fight discrimination based on age and ensure full enjoyment of all of their rights on an equal footing with everyone else. Delegates, both children and adults have conventions that help to achieve goals. We don't have that. 73 years ago, Eva Perón, political leader of Argentina, said no country can be great unless it protects and respects its older persons. There cannot be a great country unless we help those that have given everything for the homeland. 75 years ago, the founders of the United Nations decided to start the Charter of the United Nations with "We the Peoples." Today, 75 years after, there cannot be a United Nations that is great if we do not protect and defend the rights of all. I invite you to be part of this session and to work and reflect together on our great challenge and our great responsibility to build a world where the most forgotten are the first. Thank you to everyone.
Tengo el honor de invitar.
I have the honor to invite the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Volkan Bozkır, to make a statement.
Madam Chairperson, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I thank Her Excellency Maria del Carmen Squef, Permanent Representative of Argentina to the United Nations and Chair of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, for the invitation to address the opening of this 11th session. This session is timely, as much of the discussion over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic has been around protecting older persons who are considered high risk and assisting with the mental health challenges associated with quarantining in order to stay safe. These are issues that member states should continue to prioritize in our longer-term recovery plans in order to strengthen social protection and ensure that healthcare systems meet the needs of older persons. Today, however, we are discussing issues which predate the pandemic, namely access to justice and access to the labor market. COVID-19 and the related global economic downturn requires a seismic shift in how we consider the labor market. Trends suggest that the share of persons aged 65 and older in the labor force will continue to increase, especially in developing regions where 2/3 of older persons reside. While poverty is the greatest social challenge facing older persons, older women are more likely to live in poverty as a result of less access to education and employment opportunities than their male counterparts throughout their lives. We therefore need to ensure equal access to quality opportunities in the labor market for older persons. Moreover, the move towards working from home requires us to increase digital literacy amongst older persons and bridge the gender-digital divide. So to this end, I trust that you will support my upcoming event on digital cooperation and connectivity. In addition, we need to learn from past experiences. In the aftermath of 2007-2009 recession, unemployment rates for older workers increased exponentially. Stable employment was lost, with many older workers taking longer than their counterparts to find new work. Much of the opportunities were lower paying and more precarious in nature. This is particularly concerning when we consider that pre-pandemic, 3 out of 4 older workers were employed in the informal sector, where they are afforded little, if any, social protection. Now is the time to reimagine national and legal frameworks for access to the labor market, as well as accessible remedies and redress mechanisms available to older persons when the right to work is not upheld. Excellencies, dear colleagues, access to justice in all its forms should be effective, non-discriminatory, and include fair procedures for dispute resolution and effective remedies for all human rights infringements. Older persons are entitled to impartial and competent judicial and administrative bodies that can deliver in a timely, affordable, and effective manner to provide prompt remedies. There is no place for ageism in society. Older persons are not a homogeneous group and should not be treated as such. All instruments of justice should take into account the specific needs of the individual exercising their rights, including their language, customs, and traditions, rules, and legal systems, and should aim to include effective mechanisms of prevention. Equal access to justice and legal empowerment is a cross-cutting core element of the rule of law. Guaranteeing equal access to justice is indispensable to combat social and economic marginalization, especially that it enables and enhances other rights. We need to be mindful that the move towards digitalization of legal proceedings, including submission of claims and following cases online and accessible formats of information threaten to leave older persons behind. Other obstacles include the affordability of legal services, excessive delays in legal processes, such as litigation, and physical access to places of justice, such as courts and police stations. We cannot overlook the needs of older persons if we are to build inclusive, resilient, and age-friendly societies and implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Today, I call on all member states to uphold the United Nations principle for older persons and to consult with older persons when creating national legal and policy frameworks. We simply cannot forsake older persons at this time of crisis. I look forward to working with you to uphold the rights of all older persons throughout the 75th session of the General Assembly. Thank you very much for having me in this very important meeting, and I wish all the best to the chairperson of this meeting. Thank you very much.
Microphone, please, for the chair. I thank the President of the General Assembly for his statement. I now invite the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Madam Ilse Brands-Keris, to make a statement on behalf of the Secretary General.
Madam Chairperson, Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends, and colleagues. It's an honor to address this working group on behalf of the Secretary General. Last year, the Secretary General launched his call to action for human rights to reaffirm the centrality of human rights to our mission. Echoing the words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the call to action reaffirms fundamental freedoms as the highest aspiration for the common people. Based on this premise, it recognizes that human rights are essential for sustainable development and just and peaceful societies. Since the launch, the world has confronted the biggest international crisis in generations. At the core, it is a human rights crisis. The devastation and suffering brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic has touched everyone in our societies, but older people have suffered the most. Over the year of the pandemic, older people across the world have faced great fear and suffering. The overwhelming majority of deaths from the pandemic have been older people. We remain alarmed by reports of the hardships and neglect experienced by older people in care homes and institutions. In extreme cases, they were left to die unattended from COVID-19 or from malnutrition or dehydration, many in some of the world's wealthiest countries. The pandemic has exposed long-standing systemic inequalities. This includes patterns of discrimination that are deeply rooted in ageism, reflected in inadequate health services for older persons, gaps in social protection, and intersecting discrimination based on age, gender, disability, and other grounds. In building forward together, we now have, as the Secretary General has emphasized, a unique and historic opportunity to forge a world built on a foundation of inalienable rights where every person's dignity is respected throughout the life cycle. This is the very purpose of this working group, to strengthen the protection of the human rights of older persons, a purpose and mission that is more relevant than ever. Our world is rapidly aging. People are living longer lives, and both the share and the number of older persons in the total population are growing. Japan is an example of this global trend. 3/4 of a century ago, there were only about 100 people aged 100 years or above in Japan. The number of centenarians continued to rise over the past 50 years. Today, there are more than 80,000 centenarians in the country. At a global level, between 2020 and 2050, the number of older persons is projected to more than double. 30 years from now, 1 in 6 people in the world will be an older person. This presents not only challenges, but also opportunities. Older persons represent an incredibly diverse group, and they are key actors of development and play crucial roles, not only in their families, but in our communities, economies, and political systems. In the face of the pandemic, for instance, we have seen older retired doctors and nurses leaping to the call for help during the peak of the crisis. A coherent, comprehensive, and integrated international legal framework on the rights of older persons that responds to the reality of our changing world and specific human rights challenges and protection gaps that older people face would allow us to reap the full benefits of longevity for sustainable development in all its dimensions. Excellencies, last year, to mark our 75th anniversary, the UN conducted a global survey asking people around the world to identify a top priority for the United Nations going forward. A vast number replied with 2 words: human rights. They identified tackling inequality and making human rights real as a central priority for United Nations. The UN 75 Dialogue on Inequalities made a specific recommendation to promote a creation of a UN Convention to protect the rights of older persons. This is a powerful message coming directly from people we serve. In responding to the COVID-19 crisis, we have strengthened our collective efforts to advocate for the human rights of older persons. Guided by the Secretary General's policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older people, UN agencies have joined up efforts under the Interagency Working Group on Aging to support the implementation of the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, launched the Global Report on Ageism, and integrating older persons in the UN Socioeconomic Response Framework for COVID-19 response and recovery. Excellencies, the Secretary General's call to action extends beyond the UN family. It is also a call to all member states, to parliamentarians, to the business community, to civil society, to national human rights institutions, and to people everywhere. In his policy brief, the Secretary General has leaned into this conversation for the first time, calling upon this working group to accelerate efforts to develop proposals for an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons. This requires full commitment by all member states and all stakeholders to collectively move forward. Genuine, effective, and meaningful participation, particularly by civil society, NHRIs, and older persons themselves in the discussion of this working group is an essential prerequisite. We shoulder a collective responsibility. Transformative change will take the full commitment and support of us all. What we need is a renewed, concerted, global determination to ensure the protection of human rights of older persons. This working group can demonstrate that commitment through a concrete roadmap towards the fulfillment of its mandate to present to the General Assembly at the earliest possible date a proposal containing, inter alia, the main elements that should be included in an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons. We must all join forces to uphold the rights and dignity of older persons everywhere. I wish you all success in your deliberations in the days ahead. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I thank the Assistant Secretary General for her statement. I now invite the working group to view a pre-recorded video statement by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Madame Michelle Bachelet.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair, and hello to all of you from Portugal. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The European Union welcomes the opening of the 11th session of the open-ended working group on aging. This year's session takes place in extremely challenging times for all of us, with devastating impact on the lives of older persons. The global COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing inequalities and disproportionately affected persons in vulnerable situations. They are at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19, and they are particularly affected by social and economic impacts of the pandemic, especially loneliness. The EU undertakes to ensure that all human rights, including the rights of older persons, remain at the core of the response to the pandemic and the global recovery. This working group sessions, being of course the most prominent international forum, provide us with the opportunity to discuss how to foster solidarity between generations and older persons can fully enjoy their human rights and reach their full potential. We must take into consideration that the characteristics of aging and the definition of the age at which someone is considered an older person vary in different societies. The situation of older persons and the promotion and protection of their human rights remain high on the agenda of the European Union and its member states. The EU strongly supports the broadest possible involvement of all actors, not only states, but especially the inclusive participation of civil society organizations and nation human rights institutions. We need to work with all partners to strengthen global and national targeted responses, to address the needs and rights of older persons.
For this reason, you and me need in this the imagine of the person. You understand? For recognize. ¿Qué esperamos? I waited the video. Hubo un pequeño inconveniente.
There was a slight confusion with the video. We began to show the video from the Portuguese representative, which is part of all of the speeches that we will be hearing later. But the speeches planned for this segment were the Secretary General, the Assistant Secretary General, we thank them for that speech, and we're hoping now to play the video of Madame Michelle Bachelet, particularly because she's so important. She is the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights, and so she has to have a central place in our meeting. So if there is a technical impediment, please let us know what it is so that we can continue with our meeting. And If necessary, we'll have to listen to this video later and we'll continue with our meeting. So please, Secretariat, let me know what the situation is. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends and colleagues. It was exactly 10 years ago that this working group began its efforts to strengthen protection of the human rights of older persons and to develop proposals for an international legal instrument towards this end. We will also soon mark the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, with its new agenda and commitment to building a society for all ages. And it has been 30 years since the adoption of the United Nations Principles for Older Persons, which laid out key principles for older persons and important guidance in terms of independence, participation, care, self-fulfillment, and dignity. And we have seen some progress, but today, that modest progress is being overshadowed by the tragic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on older persons. The crisis has exposed critical human rights protection gaps for older persons, including widespread discrimination based on older age, lack of social protection, especially for women, and of access to health services, failure to uphold autonomy and participation in decision-making, and failure to ensure that older people are free from violence, neglect, and abuse. The Secretary General's policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons issued on May 2020 made it clear how vital it is to step up efforts to protect the human rights of older persons in the pandemic and beyond it. In response, 146 member states issued a statement committing them to, and I will quote, fully promoting and respecting the dignity and rights of older people, end of quote. This is just one example of what I see as a renewed political imperative to prioritize the protection of older persons. I also welcome the increasingly strong and organized work of civil society movements around the world. Many of you are among the 122 civil society organizations and networks whose recent joint letter to the Secretary General welcomed the policy brief and urged increased efforts across the UN system to uphold the human rights of older people. We are also seeing increased UN interagency efforts across countries, regions, and the world to respond to the pandemic with efforts that are coordinated, age-inclusive, and rights-based. Implementation of the new UN Decade for Healthy Aging, approved by the General Assembly last year, offers opportunities for greater collaboration. The Secretary General's policy brief called on states to accelerate efforts by this working group to develop proposals for an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons. In line with the request made at the most recent working group session, my office has been updating the analytical paper Normative Standards in International Law in Relation to Older Persons, originally issued in 2012 as a contribution to the working group. The new updated OHCHR study takes stock of developments over the last decade and provides further analysis of protection gaps, as well as the adequacy of the existing international legal framework for the promotion and protection of the human rights of older persons. It includes some of the impacts of COVID-19, including the added urgency of addressing these gaps by building more age-friendly societies. The study highlights that the existing international human rights framework provides fragmented and inconsistent coverage of the human rights of older persons in law and practice. Engagement by international human rights mechanisms on the human rights of older persons has been far from systematic, coherent, or sustained. The lack of a dedicated normative instrument on the subject and the conceptual limitations of existing instruments continue to hinder the effective protection of human rights of older persons. The experience of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, among other instruments, clearly demonstrates that development of a dedicated legal instrument can effectively contribute to changes in law and practice at the national level. I hope that this study will contribute to your discussions as you consider next steps forward towards the fulfillment of your important mandate. Thank you very much.
Agradezco a la alta
I thank the High Commissioner for her statement. That last statement concludes the opening segment. I now invite the open-ended working group to turn to agenda item 2, entitled Adoption of the Agenda and Other Organizational Matters. The provisional agenda for the 11th session of the open-ended working group on aging is contained in document A/AC 278/2021/1 and is available in all 6 official languages, and the proposed organization of our work is contained in a conference room paper which is A/AC 278/2021/CRP1, published in English only, which is available on the website of the working group. I now invite the working group to consider the provisional agenda for this session as contained in document A/AC 278/2021/1. Are there any comments on the provisional agenda? I see none. May I take it that the working group wishes to adopt the provisional agenda? I hear no objection. It is so decided. Next, I invite the working group to turn to the proposed organization of work for the 11th session of the open-ended working group as contained in an informal paper in English only as document A/AC 278/2021/CRP1. Are there any comments on the proposed organization of work as circulated in the document that I've just mentioned? May I take it that the working group wishes to approve this proposed organization of work for its 11th session as contained in the conference room paper, on the understanding that further adjustments will be made, if necessary, during the course of the session? I hear no objection. It is so decided. In this regard, I would like to inform delegations that any changes to the organization of work will be announced via the e-delegate platform and posted on the website of the working group. Additional background information and documentation has also been posted on this website. So now we move on to something that I think is very important before we conclude item 2 of the program. I invite the working group to return to item 1. We have received the following candidacies for the vice chairs of the open-ended working group on aging bureau: Madam Spela Costa of Slovenia as vice chair for the Eastern European group, and Mr. Stefano Algera of Portugal as vice chair for the Western European and Other States group. May I take it that the open-ended working group wishes to elect by acclamation Madam Spela Costa of Slovenia and Mr. Stefano Algera of Portugal as vice chairs of the open-ended working group on aging? I hear no objection. It is so decided. I now invite, we move to item 2, adoption of the agenda and other organizational matters. I now invite the open-ended working group to resume its consideration of agenda item 2, entitled Adoption of the Agenda and Other Organizational Matters. Distinguished delegates, as you are aware, the coronavirus disease, COVID-19 pandemic, and the associated limitations on the holding of in-person meetings at United Nations headquarters continue to impact on our work. In light of the foreseen limitations and with a view to ensuring the successful conclusion of the work of the open-ended working group, the Bureau recommended specific arrangements for the 11th session for consideration by the working group. The Bureau has consulted delegations on a document entitled Recommended Arrangements for the Work of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging at its 11th session, outlining the proposed arrangements for the conduct of this session. The recommendation was to apply the arrangements as a temporary measure and without setting a precedent for future sessions of the working group. It was recommended that for the general discussion, representatives of member states, observer states and the European Union will be invited to indicate if they wish to deliver their remarks in person or via pre-recorded video message when inscribing on the list of speakers. Similarly, representatives of accredited civil society and A-status national human rights institutions participating in the general discussion, in accordance with the decision taken at the organisational and 7th session of the open-ended working group, would be invited to do so via pre-recorded video message. Written statements, including for the pre-recorded video statements, were to be submitted to e-statements@un.org. Furthermore, as part of the Bureau's recommendations, the proposed high-level panel on COVID-19 and older persons, the interactive expert panel discussions on normative inputs and the focus areas followed by the interactive discussions with participants as well as the discussion on the way forward will be held via virtual informal meetings with remote simultaneous interpretation provided and therefore limited to 2 hours in duration. The draft report of the working group at its 11th session will be issued as document A/AC 278/2021/L1 and would follow the structure of the report of the working group at its 10th session, issued as A/AC 278/2019/2, including information on the deliberations during all formal and informal meetings held at its 11th session. These arrangements were set out in a document entitled Recommended Arrangements for the Work of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging at its 11th session, which was shared with Member States. I was informed by Bureau members that no objections were received. May I take it that it is the wish of the Working Group to be guided by the Bureau's recommendations for the proceedings at its 11th session? It is so decided. In the light of the comments just made, would any delegation like to make any comments? No, so therefore it's approved. Item 3. Participation of national human rights institutions in the work of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. I now invite the working group to turn its attention to agenda item 3, entitled Participation of National Human Rights Institutions in the Work of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. The Open-Ended Working Group may wish to recall that at the first meeting of its 7th session on the 12th of December 2016, it adopted a decision on the modalities of participation of national human rights institutions in its work. These modalities are provided in the report of the working group on its 7th session as Decision 7/1, as contained in Section E of Document A/AC 278/2016/2. In accordance with this decision, a list of requests for accreditation received from 12 national human rights institutions which are accredited by the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions and are in full compliance with the Paris Principles as endorsed by the General Assembly in its Resolution 48/134 of the 20th of December 1993, A-status institutions, was circulated to all states members of the Open-Ended Working Group by the Secretariat through the Bureau of the Open-Ended Working Group on the 9th of March 2020, 4 weeks before the originally scheduled dates for this session. Decision 7.1 provides that upon such a request, the accreditation to each session of the working group shall be granted to A-status national human rights institutions. May I take it that the working group wishes to proceed accordingly with regard to the 12 requests received? I hear no objection. It is so decided. Very well.
Ok. Tema 4.
Item 4. Participation of non-governmental organizations in the work of the open-ended working group on aging. At the first meeting of its organizational session of the 15th of February 2011, the working group adopted the modalities of participation of non-governmental organizations in its work, which are contained in Section F of the report of the working group, issued as document A/AC 278/2011/2. In line with this decision, I would like to bring to your attention the requests from 38 non-governmental organizations to participate in the sessions of the Working Group on Aging that were received by the Secretariat. I invite the Secretary to read out the list of non-governmental organizations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Number 1, People's Research on Grassroots Ownership and Traditional Initiative. Number 2, My Grandpa Ma Uganda. Number 3, Fondation NTD. Number 4, Convite AC. Number 5, Holocaust Community Services, CJE Senior Life. Number 6, Alzheimer's disease and related dementias in Zambia. Number 7, the Coalition of Societies for the Rights of Older Persons in Nigeria. Number 8, Azar Initiative Empowerment for the Less Privileged. Number 9, Grandmothers Advocacy Network. Number 10, Tego Obaze Nekami Global Foundation. Number 11, Civil Service Pensioners Alliance. Number 12, Lanka Fundamental Rights Organization. Number 13, Association for Social Solidarity and Empowerment Training Trust, Asset Trust. Number 14, the Association for the Aged. Number 15, Asociación de Profesores Universitarios Jubilados. Number 16, Center for Happy Elderly People. Number 17, Amigos de los Mayores. Number 18, African Relief Development Initiative. Number 19, Slovenian Federation of Pensioners Associations. Number 20, Shirakat Partnership for Development. Number 21, Peace Empowerment Foundation. Number 22, St. Elizabeth Healthcare. Number 23, National Senior Citizens Organization of Liberia. Number 24, Ardacher. Number 25, Forum for the Right of the Elderly, Bangladesh. Number 26, Confederación Estatal de Mayores Activos. Number 27, Tebota Prolithny v Ukraini. Number 28, Console Mission. Number 29, Center for Innovative Social Development, Ghana. Number 30, Syrian Expatriates Medical Association. Number 31, Reproductive Advocate Health Education, Ghana. Number 32, Liberian Association of Retired Persons. Number 33, Global Initiative for Environment and Reconciliation. Number 34, Association for Single Mothers, Kenya. Number 35, Brain Health Initiative of Nigeria. Number 36, European Aging Network. Number 37, Meals on Wheels Community Services, South Africa. Number 38, National Council for Family Affairs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Doy las gracias a
I thank the Secretary. As in the past, the list of these 38 non-governmental organizations, as well as their applications, were posted on the website of the Working Group and brought to the attention of Member States by the Bureau. Subsequently, the Bureau was informed that 3 Member States had objected to the application from non-governmental organizations for accreditation to the open-ended Working Group. In consultations, the 3 Member States each confirmed to the Bureau their individual objection to the application for accreditation submitted by the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association. At my request, the Bureau members informed their respective regional groups about the objections received. In this connection, I wish to recall paragraph C2 of the decision adopted on the participation of NGOs in the work of the open-ended Working Group on Aging, as reflected in document A/AC 278/2011/2, which reads at the beginning that the open-ended working group at the beginning of each of its sessions shall consider and take decisions on new applications against which a state member of the working group has raised an objection. And In this regard, I invite the working group to consider the new applications to which no objection has been received. May I take it that the working group wishes to grant accreditation to the 37 NGOs to which no objection has been received to participate in the work of the open-ended working group? I see no objection. It is so decided. I now invite the working group to consider the application submitted by the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association. Are there any comments? I give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Prior to moving towards the discussion of this item, we should like to clarify and receive a more detailed explanation vis-a-vis the procedural justifications for the taking of a decision in the absence of the necessary quorum. To our knowledge, we do not yet have a quorum. Thank you.
Coincido con la...
I agree with the delegation of Russia. Since there's no quorum, we'll deal with this this afternoon once we have a quorum. Does the room agree with that? Does the Russian Federation agree with that?
Muy bien.
Very well. So that's how we'll proceed. Let's hope we have a quorum this afternoon, and then we will revisit that point. So now we move on to item 5. Entitled Measures to Enhance the Promotion and Protection of the Human Rights of Older Persons, and a general discussion to begin on this. Before giving the floor to the first speaker on the list, would like to record to delegations that they must respect the 3 minutes limit on behalf of one member state and 5 minutes for statements on behalf of groups. The live link to the list of speakers previously circulated to all delegations is also available in the journal announcement for today's meeting. In view of current risk mitigation measures, delegations are kindly invited to send any requests for changes to the list of speakers or any questions relating to the session to oewgageing@un.org. I would like to inform delegations that the list of speakers for the general discussion is now closed. We shall now start the general discussion. And I'll go to the list of speakers. And we're going to begin with the video from Her Excellency the Minister of Labour, Solidarity and Social Security of Portugal, Madam Ana Mendes Godinho, speaking on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair, and hello to all of you from Portugal. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The European Union welcomes the opening of the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. This year's session takes place in extremely challenging times for all of us, with devastating impact on the lives of older persons. The global COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing inequalities and disproportionately affected persons in vulnerable situations. They are at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19, and they are particularly affected by social and economic impacts of the pandemic, especially loneliness. The EU undertakes to ensure that all human rights, including the rights of older persons, remain at the core of the response to the pandemic and the global recovery. This working group sessions, being of course the most prominent international forum, provide us with the opportunity to discuss how to foster solidarity between generations and older persons can fully enjoy their human rights and reach their full potential. We must take into consideration that the characteristics of aging and the definition of the age at which someone is considered an older person vary in different societies. The situation of older persons and the promotion and protection of their human rights remain high on the agenda of the European Union and its member states. The EU strongly supports the broadest possible involvement of all actors, not only states, but especially the inclusive participation of civil society organizations and nation human rights institutions. We need to work with all partners to strengthen global and national targeted responses, to address the needs and rights of older persons and foster more inclusive, equitable, resilient and age-friendly societies. The EU also welcomes the 2020 policy brief of the United Nations Secretary-General on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons and its appeal for countries to promote responses to the pandemic based on the respect of the rights and dignity of older persons as well as global solidarity. In this brief, the Secretary-General also notes the need to strengthen the protection of human rights of older persons, including through the work of this working group. The same way, the EU welcomes the UN EC guidelines on mainstreaming aging prepared by the Standing Working Group on Aging and presented 2 weeks ago. At the EU level, aging is a top priority for the current trio presidency. In October 2020, the Council approved conclusions on improving the well-being of older persons in the era of digitalization, putting forward a human rights-based approach. In January, the Commission published the Green Paper on Aging, kicking off a broad consultation process. Earlier in March 2021, the Commission published its action plan on the pillar of social rights, addressing its outstanding principles, many of which also concern the well-being of older persons, and the Council just adopted conclusions on mainstreaming aging in public policies on March the 12th. The European Commission, for the first time in its history, has a dedicated Commissioner for Equality, which encompasses the rights of older persons, while the Vice President on Democracy and Demography is tasked, inter alia, with aging policy. In the EU, aging population is predominant demographic pattern in many member states. The contribution of older persons to society, namely their experience, their knowledge and their skills, is duly and increasingly acknowledged. Improved living conditions allow many to remain active much longer. Therefore, supporting healthy and active aging is crucial for enabling all older persons to enjoy their rights and autonomy and to be able to fully, meaningfully and effectively participate in the society. This year, the follow-up reports on the 27th Ministerial Conference on Aging in Lisbon, Portugal, on a sustainable society for all ages, realizing the potential of living longer, will be submitted to UNEC and will include the stock-taking of 20 years of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging and the last 5 years of the Regional Implementation Strategy. Mrs. Chair, these recent developments illustrate the priority that the EU gives to the human rights of older persons and our capacity to make further advances. I would like to recall that the EU and its member states fully support the work and the mandate of Ms. Claudia Mahler, the independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. We are pleased about her role in the discussions this year. This year's report notes that the current instruments do not specifically address the issues of aging or do not make them adequately visible. We will continue our active participation in the open-ended working group, just as we are also engaged in other multilateral discussions on the human rights of the older persons, including in the third committee of the UN General Assembly and in the Human Rights Council. Older persons have heterogeneous needs and preferences and face diverse challenges in the course of their lives. Therefore, we consider that the protection and promotion of human rights of older persons require the involvement of multiple stakeholders, including, of course, civil society organizations. This year, the high-level panel on COVID-19 and the rights of older persons will give us an opportunity to have a broad exchange of views and to identify issues that need to be addressed as a priority in order to address multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and violence. We further strongly believe that older persons as agents of change must be included in the response to the COVID-19 and to building back better. In that sense, it is imperative to fully empower them. I wish all of us a fruitful discussion with the aim of sourcing a tangible progress in meeting the needs of older persons and the realization of their human rights. Thank you, Mrs. Chair.
Agradecemos a la...
We thank Her Excellency the Minister of Labour, Solidarity and Social Security of Portugal for her statement. And we now move on to His Excellency Mr. Christian Brown, Permanent Representative of Luxembourg, who will be speaking on behalf of the LGBTI core group.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of member states of the LGBTI core group. The LGBTI core group is an informal cross-regional group established in 2008. The group is co-chaired by Argentina and the Netherlands and includes Albania, Australia, Bolivia, Brazil, Cabo Verde, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, Ecuador, El Salvador, France, Germany, Iceland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, Malta, Montenegro, Mexico, Nepal, New Zealand, North Macedonia, Norway, Spain, Sweden, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the United States of America, Uruguay, the European Union, as well as the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the non-governmental organizations Human Rights Watch and Outright Action International. The COVID-19 pandemic has a devastating impact on the lives of older persons, including older persons' right to life and to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standards of physical and mental health. The hard reality of the crisis has laid bare discrimination based on older age, lack of social protection, social inclusion and access to health services, lack of autonomy and participation in decision-making, as well as increased online and offline violence, neglect and abuse suffered by older persons. Sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and sex characteristics intersect with age and can have compounding effects on economic, social and cultural rights, including access to labor markets, social protection, education and lifelong learning, access to justice, as well as access to health services. As a result of the dramatic economic consequences caused by COVID-19, older LGBTI persons are even more exposed to poverty and multiple and intersecting forms of violence and discrimination. Older LGBTI persons who work in the informal sector often lack access to paid sick leave and unemployment compensation and coverage. Restrictions on the freedom of movement influence the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of older persons and may impede access to medical treatment and care. This affects individuals on medication for chronic conditions and persons with disability, as well as transgender and intersex older persons who may have specific health requirements. Given overloaded health systems, treatment and medical needs of LGBTI persons, including HIV testing and treatment, hormonal treatment, and gender-affirming treatments for trans persons may be interrupted or deprioritized. The LGBTI core group stands firmly against any form of violence, discrimination, and marginalization on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and sex characteristics at all stages of life. For this reason, it is important to recognize that older LGBTI persons can face additional challenges, isolation, stigma, and discrimination just because of who they are and whom they love. Too often, discrimination against older LGBTI persons remains invisible due to their age and isolation, as well as lack of disaggregated data on their realities and programs that focus on their specific needs. We must work to raise awareness and overcome their lack of visibility, and we need to identify and include specific measures in this process and ensure that all older persons, including LGBTI older persons, are able to participate fully, freely, and equally in our societies. Empowering older persons in all their diversity is imperative to build back better. At a time when international and intergenerational solidarity is needed the most, it is still a sad reality that LGBTI persons' access to education, social protection, and the labor market, as well as their access to decision-making processes and justice, are limited by the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, harassment, and violence they are victims of throughout their lives, meaning that their opportunities at a later stage of life are further diminished. We believe that all measures undertaken to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the dignity of older persons should pay due regard to the needs of persons belonging to specific communities, such as older LGBTI persons, in order to create a virtuous circle of protection and human developments for all. The LGBTI core group reiterates that in order to strengthen the protection of the human rights of all older persons, it is crucial that online and offline violence, discrimination, neglect, and abuse, as well as political, social, and economic exclusion of any individual or group must end. The core group also makes a call to all those here at the 11th session of the open-ended working group on aging to join us in committing to include all older persons, including older LGBTI persons, as active agents of change in our effort to promote and protect human rights. I thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to the representative of Luxembourg speaking on behalf of the LGBTI core group. We now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Milenko Skoknik, Permanent Representative of Chile, who will be speaking on behalf of the group of Friends of Older Persons. Milenko, you have the floor.
Excellencies, guests, and colleagues, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the group of Friends of Older Persons at the United Nations in New York. The group is comprised of Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Indonesia, Kenya, Malaysia, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Philippines, Qatar, Slovenia, South Africa, Trinidad and Tobago, Turkey, Uruguay, and my own country, Chile. Due to time limitations, I will read a short version of that statement. The complete text is available at eDelegate. Firstly, allow me to congratulate you, Madam Chair, members of the Bureau, and the Secretariat of the Open-Ended Working Group for your efforts in organizing this session. The group of Friends of Older Persons firmly supports the work of this working group created by General Assembly Resolution 65-182. It provides a clear mandate for strengthening the protection of human rights of older persons by considering the existing international framework of human rights and identifying possible gaps and how best to address them, including, when appropriate, the feasibility of further instruments and measures. Excellencies, the increase in the number of older persons globally and the growing trend of aging societies all over the world represent a significant change to the demographic structure of our society and imposes a series of new changes to development and human rights. According to the Secretary General Policy Brief on the impact of COVID-19 in older persons, the pandemic is having a devastating impact across the world, with a disproportionate risk for mortality and severe disease following infection, poverty, discrimination, stigmatization, and isolation of older persons. The reality highlights the importance of recognizing that urgent attention is needed with respect to the challenges and opportunities facing older persons. Madam Chair, the legal and policy frameworks should provide more specific protection for older persons. The realization of the right to work, the adequate access to the labor market, and the access to justice by older persons are a prerequisite for living an independent, dignified life. Nevertheless, they face significant challenges. Age discrimination is evident across all stages of the employment process. Older persons suffer discriminatory treatment while employed, and also in the retirement process. The older persons in our communities face high rates of vulnerable employment and lack access to training, in particular to keep up to date in ICT and in various technologies. Regarding the access to justice, there are physical barriers, including the lack of accessible court buildings, transportation, waiting or sitting areas, and information, especially for older people living in rural areas. The court proceedings do not consider older persons' needs. The lack of affordability of legal services or free legal assistance and the excessive delays and long period that legal process take, and therefore restrict access to justice for older persons who in many cases are not alive to enjoy the outcome of the time the process ends. It is important to take actions to increase participation in the labor market of the aging working group population and to reduce the risk of exclusion or dependency in later stages of life. It is undeniable that older persons can make a significant contribution to the social, economic, and sustainable development of their societies if an enabling environment and adequate guarantees are in place. These include investing in closing the digital divide, lifelong education, digital literacy, and digital skills in order to foster the social inclusion of older persons. In that sense, it is imperative that we fully empower older persons to allow them becoming not only recipients of special care and social protection, but also specific right holders and active agents and beneficiaries of change. In this regard, we welcome the adoption of Resolution 75/131, 2021-2030 United Nations Decade of Healthy Aging. It represents an opportunity to bring together government, civil society, international agencies, professionals, academia, media, and private sector for 10 years of concerted, catalytic, and collaborative action to improve the life of older people, their families, and communities. We also welcome the adoption of Resolution 74/274 on international cooperation to ensure global access to medicine, vaccines, and medical equipment to face COVID-19, which has facilitated the work of the UN system in its coordinated response to the pandemic and could greatly benefit the health of older persons. Our group firmly believes that incorporating aging and the human rights of older persons into global agenda is essential and that a concerted effort is required to move towards a wide and equitable approach to policy integration. The task is to link aging to other frameworks for social and economic development and human rights. Whereas specific policies will vary according to country and region, population aging is a universal force that has the power to shape the future. It is essential to recognize the ability of older persons to contribute to society by taking the lead not only in their own betterment but also to the society as a whole if they can be truly autonomous and independent and fully enjoy their rights. To conclude, Madam Chairperson, the group of friends stands ready to engage in substantive discussion with other member states and all stakeholders during this session in order to reach a productive outcome and lead a step forward in the process of development of an international instrument for the protection and promotion of the human rights of older persons. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much to the representative, permanent representative of Chile, speaking on behalf of the Group of Friends of Older Persons. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Madam Francisca Giffey, Federal Minister for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth from Germany, via video presentation.
Madam Chair, Excellencies, the COVID-19 pandemic is causing untold fear and suffering for older people across the world. That is what the United Nations Secretary General wrote in his policy brief last year. And he urged, we must do everything possible to preserve their rights and dignity at all times. These sentences are a call to action for all of us, but especially for the open-ended working group on aging. Your mission is to strengthen the rights of older people. Thank you for your commitment and perseverance. The good news in these difficult times is you are not alone. The German government is on your side. During our presidency of the Council of the EU, we organized a joint online conference with Age Platform Europe and the German National Association of Senior Citizens Organizations on lifelong learning and digitalization. We drafted and negotiated EU Council conclusions on the rights of older persons, the first in a decade. We are also dedicated to further strengthening older people's rights at UN level. Together with Austria, we funded an update to the 2012 study concerning the international human rights in relation to older persons. The study is a good basis for further discussions on gaps in the human rights system and how to overcome them. Therefore, we will continue to participate in the open-ended working group on aging and advance our common cause to strengthen older people's rights, their dignity and participation. I wish you a fruitful discussion in the next couple of days, and I am looking forward to your results. Kind regards from Berlin.
Agradecemos.
I'd like to thank the distinguished Minister from Germany for her statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Madam Adwa Safo, Minister of Gender, Children and Social Protection from Ghana, again via video presentation.
Distinguished Chair and delegates, I am pleased and honored to be here today to represent my country, Ghana, in the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Chair, the Bureau, and the Secretariat for this opportunity. And I'm very confident that with your rich experience, you will successfully manage this session to achieve our objectives. I bring you greetings from His Excellency, the President of Ghana, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, who over the years has dedicated his life to the cause of the promotion of social inclusion and protection of the vulnerable, including the aged in society. Ghana, like many other lower middle-income countries, is experiencing a demographic transition with its aging population. It is projected that the population of older adults in Ghana will increase to 2.3 million in 2025 and 5.6 million in 2050. Furthermore, the Ghana Living Standards Survey, round 6, also revealed that the population of the aged who are above 65 years accounts for 4.8% of our population. The government of Ghana has responded to the issue of aged with relevant policies and programs to address aged-related challenges. Firstly, Ghana has an aging policy dubbed Aging with Security and Dignity that focuses on challenges spanning on housing, health, poverty in Ghana. Other policies formulated to address the issue include the Ghana Social Protection Policy, which includes the Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty Program, the National Health Insurance Program, and many more. The policy stipulates the creation of a coordinating institution called the National Council on Aging to oversee the implementation of the policy. The ministries, agencies, and metropolitan assemblies have since integrated a draft action plan into their own programs and developed sectorial action plans. Our Constitution protects every human being, including the vulnerable, not excluding the aged. We have other legal frameworks, including the Social Security and National Insurance Trust Pension Scheme Law 2004, Act 883. We also have the Long-Term Saving Act 2004, Act 679. The goal of all these acts is to achieve an overall social, economic, and cultural reintegration of older persons into mainstream society in order to enable them participate practically and fully in their communities and the national development process. In pursuit of this goal, full recognition is given to their fundamental human rights, including the right to independent, active participation in society and benefit from community support and care. Self-fulfillment. In implementing the policy, the following actions are being taken by government to address issues affecting older persons, and these include the provision of social cash grant under the LEAD program, which takes on approximately 300,053 persons who are 65 years and above in extreme poor households to smoothing their daily consumption. The ministry, in collaboration with the National Health Insurance Authority, is registering older persons also above 65 years onto the National Health Insurance Scheme free of charge. In addition, the healthcare needs of the aged are also being taken care of by the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection in the area of collaboration with the Ghana Health Service and the Ministry of Health to provide other services and training. Ghana has therefore also developed accessibility standards for the built environment, which is to ensure that all public institutions are disability friendly as well as accessible to older persons. Government again is working on rehabilitating and refurbishing the alleged witches' camp into a shelter for the aged. Again, Madam Chair, Ghana established a multi-sectorial agency advisory committee on aging to guide the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection on aging issues. The Ghana National Social Protection Policy was launched to cater for the entire life cycle, fill social protection gaps, and strategically balance social assistance, social security, and production inclusion. The Ghana government has also established a call center for citizens, including the older persons, to call for grievance redress and complaints or information on any abuse. Government institutions such as the SHRAJ and Legal Aid Department also offer human rights support to the aged. The country is also working on an aged persons bill. To this end, distinguished Chair, Ghana, in collaboration with civil society organizations, have been actively participating in the ECOWAS, African Union, and United Nations activities on persons with disability. I must say, distinguished Chair, that Ghana is committed to pursuing these strategies aimed at addressing the needs of older adults in the national effort to ensure that we do indeed leave no one behind in the implementation of sustainable development goals. I thank you for your attention.
Agradecemos a la...
I thank the distinguished representative of Ghana. We're now going to hear a pre-recorded video from His Excellency Mr. Daniel Arroyo, Minister of Social Development of Argentina.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam Chair of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, Ambassador Maria del Carmen Scef, to the working group as a whole, member states, organizations of civil society, human rights institutions, experts, and other United Nations agencies. Locally, in Argentina, we are working to promote and protect and ensure the full enjoyment of the rights of older persons. Our goal is to contribute to the full inclusion, integration, and participation in society of older persons. It's clear that this has been a difficult year. It's clear that the pandemic has been very complex, and those that have been most affected are older persons. We in Argentina have a national policy department for older persons called DINAPAM, and its main goal is to design and implement programs for the promotion and protection and integration of older persons. And this department has a long history in Argentina that's very important. We also have a Federal Council for Older Persons. That's a federal body which brings together and coordinates all of the policies as they relate to older persons. And we have coverage for food needs for older persons in terms of their retirement, with social security, and with medical coverage, which is very broad. There are some difficulties, I admit, but it's very broad coverage. Older persons have a fundamental role for us. On the one hand, we have generated a national register of home care providers. This is a tool which works through a web page where you can access information to get information on those who provide care services. Clearly, the care systems are key in the near future. We believe that there are 5 productive sectors that are going to require a lot of labor in the future: construction, food production, textile activity, recycling, and care systems. And here as well, we're talking about an area that can create significant employment. As home care workers, these workers must have formal accreditation to do this work, training, and sometimes university, tertiary training, and sometimes so that they can provide care services to social organizations and various healthcare providers. We're also in the process of vaccinating against COVID-19 in a very difficult context, but the majority of those over 70 have already been vaccinated in Argentina. We welcome the holding of this annual meeting more than ever before. We stress our commitment to those who most require our help, particularly in this global context, which is genuinely critical. Older persons require the assistance of the state, and older women have serious difficulties. We want to strengthen our commitment and our actions. Thank you. We would like to thank the distinguished representative of Argentina, and also via pre-recorded video, I give the floor to Her Excellency Madam Elena Bonetti, Minister for Family and Equal Opportunities of Italy.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Italy aligns itself with the statement pronounced by the European Union. On behalf of the Italian government, I'm very pleased to take part for the first time in a session of the open-ended working group on aging, and I'm grateful that digital technologies allow us today to narrow the distances in such a dramatic situation caused by the pandemic. We are aware that we are living an age of aging. As you all know, Italy is currently the EU country and the second country in the world with the highest share of persons aged 65 or older in its total population. And in general, people worldwide are living longer. This scenario comes with a number of outstanding challenges, including those posed by the current COVID-19 pandemic, which hurt our older population the most. Indeed, we all have equal rights, regardless of age. Now, it is time to turn our focus from helping people reach old age to helping them reach a healthy, active, and happy old age, and as suggested in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, to leave no one behind. Italy stands ready to face these challenges and is boosting its work for the concrete achievement of the objectives of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, also in the framework of the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. Indeed, the Italian government is currently implementing a specific 3-year project aimed at creating a national coordination network of the main stakeholders working on active aging in Italy, which could pave the way to the elaboration of the first national strategy on active aging. As a testimony of the Italian government's steady commitment to protect, strengthen and promote the human rights of older people, I'm honored and happy to announce that Italy will host the next UN-ECE Ministerial Conference on Aging in Rome the next year, on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Madrid International Plan. The conference will represent an extraordinary opportunity to promote a comprehensive dialogue among different stakeholders and to elaborate on innovative solutions of improving the well-being of older women and men in the UNECE countries. Dear colleagues, we will emerge from this pandemic with many wounds, but more resilient than ever before. I hope to see many of you in Rome next year. Thank you.
Agradecemos a la distinguida.
I thank the distinguished representative of Italy for his statement, and also via pre-recorded video we will hear from His Excellency Mr. Michael Farrugia, Minister for Senior Citizens and Active Aging of Malta.
Honourable Chair, colleagues, senior citizens, I have the honour to speak on behalf of the Maltese government as Minister for Senior Citizens and Active Aging. The strengthening of the protection of human rights for older persons has never been so necessary as it is today. Older persons are undoubtedly one category of citizens who are suffering the most during the COVID-19 pandemic. Looking back at the past 13 months, one can never overemphasize the crucial role of Malta's national strategies on active aging, dementia care, and long-term care in Malta's success in safeguarding the well-being of older persons, despite the social distance or any lockdown measures. Such proactive initiatives led to an increase in public pensions for 6 years in a row, the strengthening of domiciliary care services, and the setting up of a unique service such as the Living Carer Scheme, which provides financial support to older persons who want to employ a full-time carer of their choice to enable them to age in place. However, the Ministry of Senior Citizens and Active Aging is not one to rest on past laurels, but is constantly looking forward. As I speak, plans are underway to offer the World Health Organization's skilled and training program called iSupport, which is intended for carers of people with dementia. The launching of the National Policy on Active Aging, the opening of a new dementia care centre, providing older persons with free instruction in ICT, a new outreach program, and reinitiating the University of the Fourth Age, which provides lifelong learning opportunities for older persons with mobility difficulties or dementia. The Maltese government advocates that the human rights of older persons are to be firmly entrenched at the centre of social policy. The government is indeed leaving no stone unturned, and upcoming policy strategies will target the quality of life of older persons in correctional facilities, those with lifelong disabilities, and LGBTIQ older persons. The Ministry is also aware that many older persons experience a range of obstacles to access justice due to financial, geographical, cultural, and health. In mitigation, both community care and legal services are being strengthened so that elder abuse and age discrimination will not continue taking place without the possibility of redress. At the same time, the realities of COVID-19 has not been lost on us, and there are rigorous recovery plans for an older population to make up for the lost time due to the pandemic. I conclude by conveying my government's thanks to the United Nations for the preparation of this 11th session. I am certain that this session will lead us closer to address the needs and rights of older persons and foster a fairer and more age-friendly world. Thank you very much.
Agradecemos al representante de Malta por su...
I thank the representative of Malta, and now via pre-recorded video I give the floor to His Excellency Raul Romero Segura, Minister of Social Development of Guatemala. I'd like to extend greetings to members of the open-ended working group on aging of the UN General Assembly. We have received instructions from the President of Guatemala that from day one of his government, each one of the social programs of the ministry would have as one of their priorities to promote older persons. Namely, the President was very aware of which parts of the population historically had been forgotten about, relegated, particularly older persons, children, the indigenous population, those with disabilities. And these parts of the population have become the focus of very many programs that we are developing in the Social Ministry Affairs. Both the regular programs as well as the COVID-19 programs that the President established gave priority to older persons in terms of beneficiaries. In other words, many programs that have had national coverage in the 22 departments and the 340 municipalities, such as the family income supplement that reached very many families, one of the priority elements of that was for older persons. Increasingly, we have the budget being approved currently for a transport subsidy for older persons in Guatemala, and also in the monetary transfers program and transfers for the food stamps. We're concentrating on older persons, but we're doing all of this with the help of the World Food Programme, which has made it possible to reach more than 1 million beneficiaries, giving Guatemalans essential food items. And one of the segments that were given priority were older persons, but also the program of social restaurants, which is a very noble program which guarantees breakfast and free lunch every day from Monday to Friday, has said as a priority older persons should be let in first to have those meals, and they're supervised by nutritionists which guarantee that they are nutritional and have the appropriate number of calories. So I'm saying all of this to say that older persons for Guatemala and the President and my ministry is a priority area, and we have a commitment. We have the commitment of the President of this administration to continue to support older persons, and we hope to share our efforts with you. We are convinced that with the resolutions and recommendations that you will design, we'll be able to further improve the work that we are doing. Thank you.
Agradecemos al excelente...
I thank His Excellency the representative of Guatemala for his statement, and we now give the floor via pre-recorded statement to Her Excellency Madam Olga Batalina, Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Protection of the Russian Federation.
Madam Chair, aging populations represent a formidable challenge for all countries. Virtually 25% of the Russian population is above the working age. We expect that in the next 20 years, the number of older persons will rise to 11 million people. This is a challenge which touches upon myriad spheres of Russian society and requires the adoption of a broad range of effective measures. Above all, it behooves us to note that, to date, the Russian Federation has a voluminous normative legal basis. It sets out rights, status, and conditions for older persons and encompasses all spheres of their lives. The main mechanism for ensuring guaranteed income for older persons in the Russian Federation is the state pension system. Russian social policy is geared towards enhancing pension benefits for older persons. It is very important that all persons of pension age receive pensions. This is more than 38 million people. Pension amounts, of course, for a given pensioner depends upon length of employment, salaries, and other factors, and the pensions rise with each year. It is difficult to envisage the present workday workforce without active participation of older persons. Older persons have considerable experience, high professionalism, and generally retain posts even after retirement, but the state pays particular attention to the protection of the labor rights of persons of pensionable age, preventing discrimination in employment. Today, there are new work modes, remote work modes, and other platforms. They are reflected in labor legislation. There is an active longevity program being developed in the Russian Federation to promote active leisure, participation in athletic activities, support for social connections. There's a silver volunteer movement which is gaining ground. 28% of older persons are engaged in volunteership. The provision of geriatric and medical assistance is being fine-tuned. There are specialized geriatric centers being set up. Preventive examinations for citizens are being provided for. These include remote ones with telemedicine being used. More than 1 million individuals receive necessary social assistance at home. There's an expansive system of residential facilities for citizens in need of further assistance, and a non-government sector which is very active. The response to new challenges of aging populations and increased expectancy includes a Russian pilot project, which is in operation in 24 regions. We believe that international cooperation is of vital importance in tackling our shared objective, namely ensuring the support for independence of older citizens, their self-fulfillment, health, quality of life, and longevity. Thank you for your attention.
I would particularly like to thank the distinguished representative of Russia for her statement. We're now going to hear from the minister from Nigeria, Minister Farouk, Sachicha Fama Farouk, Minister for Humanitarian Affairs and Social Development.
Bueno, señor presidente, señores miembros del grupo.
Members of the working group, thank you very much for inviting my country
Distinguished delegates, let me use this opportunity to congratulate the Chair on her appointment as permanent representative of Argentina to the United Nations. We thank you, Your Excellency, for your good works during your tour of duty as Ambassador to Nigeria. It is our belief that you will continue the excellent work of your predecessor for this open-ended working group. Nigeria welcomes the progress made over the last decade under this open-ended working group in identifying concrete, substantive, and normative elements where the protection of human rights of older persons need to be further strengthened. Nigeria recognizes the importance of a normative framework that will encompass all priorities, interests, and preferences of older persons, and strongly supports moving forward the process with the outcome documents that will clearly elevate the current level of attention on older persons. In this regard, Nigeria recognizes the fundamental rights of older persons and commits to abolish all forms of discrimination based on age, and is undertaking a series of measures to ensure that the rights of older persons are protected by appropriate legislation, multi-sectoral policies and programs, including the National Social Protection Policy, National Policy on Aging 2020, and Senior Citizens Center Act 2018 in order to advance aging inclusion and rights of older persons. Madam Chair, it gives me great joy to announce today that just last month, the Federal Executive Council approved the National Policy on Aging, whose objective is to have a society where senior citizens are guaranteed security, independence, participation, comprehensive care, self-fulfillment, and dignity. This approval could not have come at a better time considering the ravaging impact of COVID-19 pandemic, particularly on older persons. Amongst other things, the policy covers the intersected spectrum of issues and opportunities for older women and men in urban and rural settings, older persons living with disabilities, older migrants, and internally displaced older persons. It also covers poor older persons and older persons that are full of value, contributing to the progress of families, communities, and the larger society. The National Senior Citizens Center Act signed into law in 2018, on the other hand, is a landmark legislation. It directs the provision for the dignity, security, and well-being of older persons in a wide range of areas, including positive reorientation of the citizenry to change perception and attitude on aging, stem discrimination against older persons, and promote investment opportunities for older persons. It also provides for health care and support services, social programs, access to labor market and financial services, occupational opportunities, education, sports and recreation, training and lifelong learning opportunities. The Act mandates the development of research and national capacities in aging and national data management systems for older persons, as well as national, global, and regional linkages to enable best practices and funding mechanisms. The COVID-19 pandemic and its ravaging impact on vulnerable groups with pre-existing conditions backed by internationally comparable data has shown the consequences of health inequity, deepening marginalization and erosion of dignity of older persons. And rising to endorse the UN Secretary General's policy belief on COVID-19 and older persons along with other 100 member states, Nigeria reiterates her position, the need for all to translate rhetoric into concrete action that will prove that we are truly committed to promoting the rights of older persons. In this regard, the Nigerian government has continued to expand its social welfare scheme, the conditional cash transfer, to significantly capture as many aged persons as possible in a monthly disbursement of sustenance stipends. Also, government is granting waivers for treatment provided to elderly in government hospitals in some states in the country. Madam Chair, Nigeria supports any effort to engage in open, constructive, and transparent cross-regional dialogue that will enable us to work with a sense of unanimity in order to realize the aim of an international framework for older persons. To demonstrate this commitment, the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria hosted the African Regional High-Level Conference on the Situation of Human Rights of Older Persons in Africa from 25th to 26th November 2019 in Abuja in collaboration with the Economic Community of West African States ECOWAS Parliament. The event brought together ministers, members of parliament, and senior representatives from 22 African countries, development partners, UN entities, academia, NGOs, and older persons representatives. It also serves as an ongoing debate between the working sessions of the United Nations General Assembly open-ended working group for the purpose of strengthening the protection of the human rights of older persons. This 11th session Madam Chair, offers us in this unprecedented time of a pandemic the opportunity to constructively dialogue to ensure that we properly situate the interests of the older persons and commit to the drafting of a UN Convention on the rights of older persons. Nigeria reiterates its readiness to fulfill its obligations under relevant international instruments that address the human rights of the elderly and significantly enhance their privileges and welfare. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished Minister of Social Affairs and Development of Nigeria. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Madam Cynthia Patricia Villa Ormeño, Vice Minister of Vulnerable Populations of Peru. Madam Chair, members of the open-ended working group on aging, thank you very much for the invitation that you've extended to my country during this session, and thank you for working so hard to organize this event. At this meeting, we'd like to tell you something about the progress that we have made as a country and what we are doing to protect the rights of older persons. Peru, like very many countries of the region, is experiencing a process of aging of the population, so much so that currently more than 12% of our national population are older persons. This gives us various challenges at various levels of government and society, because we have to plan for an active old age that protects the rights of older persons. For very many years now, there have been significant progress made in the area of protection. We approved the general law of older persons, as well as the regulation of various directives related to the protection of their rights. For example, their participation in a dignified, active old age. And a few months ago, Peru ratified the Inter-American Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Older Persons, through which my country has strengthened its international commitment to protecting this target population. Also, during the pandemic, this was a very difficult situation for older persons. In the Ministry for Women and Vulnerable Populations, and really throughout the Peruvian state, we developed strategies for their protection. We approved a legislative decree number 1474 specifically to protect all of their rights during this emergency situation. Likewise, and recently, in the month of January, we approved the YANAPE 60+ strategy, through which we provide specific protection to the older person population in residential care homes. All of these commitments, all of these strategies, only further endorse the fact that the Peruvian state is working hand in hand with international organizations to protect older persons. Also, this is working hand in hand with the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Various areas such as work and justice are also important and have been included in our project for a multinational policy in favor of older persons, which will soon be approved by the Peruvian state, with providing a series of services to help them. Once again, I thank you for this invitation, and I invite all of us to work together to protect the rights of older persons. Thank you very much. We thank the Vice Minister of Vulnerable Populations of Peru for her statement. I now give the floor via video to His Excellency Mr. Stanislav Raskan, State Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia.
Madam Chair, Slovenia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union and would like to thank the Chair and other Bureau members for all the work done in these challenging conditions. Madam Chair, it has been a year since the global pandemic has caused unprecedented suffering, in particular among the older persons. Aging societies and demographic challenges are global reality. We welcome the recent comprehensive response by the European Commission in this regard, the Green Paper on Aging. Its purpose is to foster lower solidarity and responsibility between generations and to launch a broad policy debate to discuss options on how to anticipate and address the challenges and opportunities that aging brings. Adhering to the goals of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the UN Decade for Healthy Aging, the Green Paper represent a significant value added. Slovenia welcomes the Secretary General's policy brief on the impact on COVID-19 on older persons, which highlights the need to accelerate the efforts of this working group to develop proposals and an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights of older persons. Slovenia also warmly welcomes the participation of the independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons, Ms. Claudia Mahler. We support her work and conclusions pointing out the weaknesses of current international legal framework and the need for its strengthening. We agree that the lack of dedicated legal instruments presents a serious impediment for older persons to the full enjoyment of their rights. Madam Chair, Slovenia continues to support an outcome document that would incorporate diverse views and give a stronger and consensual mandate for our future work. We are looking forward to our discussions in the upcoming days. Thank you very much.
We thank the representative of Slovenia for his statement. And now, via video, I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Francisco Ceballos, Technical Secretary of the National Council for Intergenerational Equality of Ecuador. Madam Chair, representatives of states, on behalf of the Ecuadorian state, I'd like to thank you for this invitation to participate at this 11th session of the working group, open-ended working group on aging. And in order to bring about a dignified, independent life for older persons. I'm sure this is a priority of all states. The population of older persons in the world has certain disadvantages. They live in situations of vulnerability, discrimination, violence, social and economic exclusion. Undoubtedly, this has been made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. In Ecuador, the 2008 Constitution recognizes older persons as holders of rights and as a group deserving priority attention. Ecuador has ratified the Inter-American Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Older Persons, and with regard to that, in 2019, we approved an organic law for older persons, and in 2020, we published a regulation, and these are legal instruments which support the work that has been done by the Ecuadorian state. Also, we have the National Development Plan 2017-2021, an entire lifetime it's called. It takes into account this population and has a special mission called My Best Years, which is an emblematic program to respond to the needs of older persons. On the programmatic side, we have the National Development Plan 2017-2021, an entire lifetime it's called, and the National Agenda for Intergenerational Equality, which highlights the importance of this group through policies which aim to develop and guarantee their rights. Due to the situation that the entire world is experiencing, and my country in particular, with regard to older persons, in 2020, the National Council for Intergenerational Equality developed a protocol for the coordination of local protection systems, where we developed a procedure for the care and protection of this population. This protocol also received recognition as being a good practice in the region. Currently, we're implementing the national specialized system for the protection and care of older persons in reference to the organic law for older persons. And we're also developing mechanisms for participation and consultation with older persons. The Sustainable Development Goals, the global agenda that all states have committed to, says that we should leave no one behind. And that's why we would like to invite and encourage states to equip us with an internationally binding instrument for the protection and guarantee of the rights of older persons. Let us sow for the future.
Gracias.
I'd like to thank His Excellency, the representative of Ecuador, for his statement. We will now hear from Her Excellency, Madam Cecilia Morel, First Lady of Chile. At this 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging of the United Nations, I would like to welcome all members of this important body and those who every day work for the good of older persons throughout the world. Throughout 2020 and this part of 2021, we've seen how older persons have had to face a pandemic that brought complications over and above health. I know that this will be one of the central things that you'll be discussing this year, and that's why I'd like to tell you briefly about our experience in Chile, where we have given priority to the care of older persons in the light of the Inter-American Convention on the Protection of Human Rights of Older Persons. The two main challenges that we have identified for older persons and their support environments are, firstly, the difficulties that they have in accessing information, goods and services, and secondly, the need to ensure that their rights are protected, providing them with links to their loved ones and avoiding mistreatment in whatever form. Chile established a strategy for providing information through a free phone number, older person's phone number, leading to an average of 150 calls a day, providing information and health information to more than 4,500 people, providing medicines through home delivery from the Ministry of Health, helping also 8,500 people with food. Of the total, more than 1,200 people receive psychological support with an average of 3 sessions per person, and around about in 800 cases of mistreatment, police action was taken and they were assisted in this process. This service has been maintained during 2021 to ensure the integrity, security and the human rights of older persons. As a government, we are providing elements of personal protection to the residents and workers of long-stage care homes. We've developed a strategy to transfer to safe residences those that are in danger of catching COVID-19, and we're saving very many lives in this way. And we're ensuring that families can reunite with their loved ones in those institutions and be there at the end of life. And that's where we have ensured that there can be a death accompanied by family members. To that, we must add a bonus for for maintaining older persons and also food security. All of this has been possible thanks to a strategic alliance with the private sector, scientific societies, non-governmental organizations and the world of academia. Currently, Chile is in the full process of vaccination. We began this process in the last days of 2020, and older persons were the priority population at the beginning. To date, almost 80% of older persons, that's more than 2.7 million people, have been vaccinated with the first dose, and very many of them have already received the second dose as well. And we hope that by the end of March, all of the older person population will have had their second dose. Finally, and given the enormous importance that Chile attaches to older persons, our government submitted to Parliament a positive ageing law aimed at establishing a working methodology based on the protection of their rights, aligned with the goals of the Decade of Healthy Aging of the World Health Organization. And we hope that your working session will be very efficient and very fruitful. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the distinguished First Lady of Chile for her statement. I now give the floor via video to Mr. Denis José Angola Algera, President of the Governing Board of the National Council of older adults of Costa Rica.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam Chair, greetings to you and everyone participating in this event. The emergency situation created by the pandemic has led to a new situation to be dealt with by member states. In that context, older persons have to be considered as those that enjoy rights and not vulnerable people that just have to be cared for. We have to ensure that their rights are respected, particularly their autonomy and their independence, bearing in mind the challenges associated with the pandemic as well, such as increased discrimination, violence, loss of loved ones, amongst other things. We have to ensure a recovery that goes beyond the emergency and that will make it possible to address efforts to help older persons. Costa Rica is working to promote and protect the human rights of this sector, adopting measures in various areas. In legislation, we signed the Inter-American Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Older Persons, and we produced a law for promoting personal independence. Legally, there is a public policy to guarantee access to justice of older persons. And there are also various follow-up and control bodies, including at the administrative level, we have the network of CARE, and recently we officialized a plan going to 2030. Currently, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development offers other possibilities to promote the human rights of older persons. Nevertheless, it must remain clear that some of the central requirements of this group are not covered adequately. Costa Rica also recognizes the importance of the resolution that reaffirms the Madrid Plan of Action. But these instruments are limited and they're not legally binding and they're not always that well publicized. We would insist that it's not just enough to recognize human rights or have general declarations. Older persons are a particular group and their needs need to be taken into account as a social collective. Hopefully the work done in this session will contribute to protecting the human rights of this sector of the population. Older persons cannot wait, and none of them should be left behind. So we would encourage this important group to commit to prepare an international convention that will provide for better protection of their human rights. Thank you very much.
Agradecemos al distinguido representante.
I thank the distinguished representative of Costa Rica for his statement, and now via video I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Simon Kiprono Chelugi, Cabinet Secretary for Labour and Social Protection of Kenya.
The chairpersons, distinguished delegates, and participants, receive greetings from the Republic of Kenya. My name is Simon Chelugi, Cabinet Secretary, Minister of Labour and Social Protection. So we are honored as a country to participate in this 11th session of the open-ended working group on aging. Kenya has progressively put in place key measures to enhance the promotion and protection of the human rights and dignity of older persons through legislative, policy, and pragmatic initiatives. The 2019 National Population and Housing Census identified the population of older persons in Kenya to be approximately 2.7 million, accounting for 6% of our country's population. The older persons face numerous challenges, and these are worsened during COVID-19 pandemic, as majority of older persons are more vulnerable to the disease. COVID-19 has subjected older persons to loneliness and isolation from close family members due to social distancing protocols that have left them confined to one place. The Constitution of Kenya provides that no one is to be discriminated on the basis of age. It obligates the state to take measures to guarantee the rights of older persons to fully participate in the affairs of the society, pursue personal development, live in dignity and respect, and free from any abuse. In addition, every person has the right to fair labor practice, to fair remuneration, and to reasonable working conditions. To ensure that all vulnerable people have the requisite financial cushion to enable them to maintain decent living standards, Kenya is implementing a number of social protection programs, the biggest being the Inua Jamii Cash Transfer Program for older persons that has allowed the senior citizens to remain active and engage in various socio-economic activities. Currently, over 800,000 older persons are benefiting under the program, and it has significantly reduced the abject poverty and improved the quality of life of older persons. To ensure continued participation in labor market, older persons in Kenya are also engaged in informal work, particularly through organized groups that undertake income-generating activities to improve their socio-economic livelihoods. Between 2013 and 2020, our ministry registered over 250,000 community groups, 5% of which are groups of older persons. The social impact by older persons in these informal groups is noticeable from the increased incomes and improved livelihoods. Distinguished delegates, our government realized that access to legal representation is essential in realizing the right for older persons. A number of measures have been undertaken to ensure availability of judicial and non-judicial mechanisms for older persons in Kenya. These include establishment of more courts, as well as increasing the number of mobile courts and establishment of alternative dispute resolution mechanism and traditional legal systems whose aim is to enhance access to justice by providing a quick and cost-effective way of settling disputes. Kenya has also established statutory institutions which implement interventions to ensure the rights of older persons are safeguarded and promoted and cushioned against neglect and abuse. Our government recognizes the important role that older persons play in our society and will continue doing everything possible to protect and safeguard their life as our senior citizens. So I thank you all delegates, thank you chairperson for listening to me. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for his statement, and now via video we'll hear from His Excellency Antonio Fernandes Toninho Costa, National Secretary for the Promotion and Defense of the Rights of Older People of Brazil.
Desse público vulnerável, os idosos brasileiros.
Older Brazilians. We want to strengthen the rights policies in the municipalities with the creation of local councils for the rights of older persons, strengthening the care policy and other measures that can protect older persons in the municipalities. Furthermore, the creation of protection networks that allow exchange and security, be that related to violence against older persons or healthcare related. Another important point is the aid and support that must be provided, which is already in course through long-stay institutions where older persons are sheltered, mostly because of emotional neglect. We also want to expand the program Viver, which focuses on healthy and active aging. That is an important inclusion program of older persons in the digital age. We still have a lot to do, but those are the key priorities. Defend the rights of older persons through the statutes of older persons, the Brazilian most important law that defends those rights, involving municipalities, states, and also federal entities.
Vamos a escuchar a través de un video al excelentísimo señor José García Ramírez, director ejecutivo del Consejo Nacional de la Persona Envejeciente de Dominicana.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. La República Dominicana le extiende un cordial saludo a usted y a los demás miembros de la mesa y confía en que bajo su...
We extend greetings to you and other members of the Bureau, and we wish you every success. We join in the declarations made by Chile on behalf of the group of Friends of Older Persons. Madam Chair, we've seen how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the world, particularly affecting older persons. This has left us with important lessons in terms of having mechanisms that can promote and better protect the human rights of this population. Isolation, discrimination, violence, the reduction of income are some of the realities that older persons throughout the world have faced in this health situation. And that is why today, more than ever before, it's necessary for member states to think again about the public policy serving this sector of the population. The government of the Dominican Republic is focused on developing inclusive policies that will provide equal rights and opportunities, promoting the inclusion in the labour market, better access to public services and health services, access to justice, as well as other forms for generating income in order to move out of poverty. We have implemented various actions such as guaranteeing solidarity pensions to older persons with an amount equivalent to 60% of the public minimum wage, implementing the family care program, which aims to give an economic incentive to families that have older persons living with them. And we've also developed a program to promote the productive life of older persons. Also, free legal assistance for them to defend their rights in the courts. The Dominican Republic, as we've briefly outlined, has been involved in implementing measures to create capacities and opportunities for the older population to be able to fully enjoy their rights, but we still have a lot to do, and that's why we must continue to work to ensure that no one is left behind. The government of the Dominican Republic is fighting to promote the development of a society for all ages. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate of the Dominican Republic. We will now hear via video Mr. Christoph Angster, Federal Ministry of Labour, Social Affairs, Health and Consumer Protection of Austria.
Dear Madam Chair, distinguished delegates and colleagues, Austria aligns itself with a statement delivered by the EU on behalf of its member states. We are very pleased that after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the Bureau of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging was able to organize this session and let us continue our efforts to progress with the work on the human rights of older persons. In this respect, I want to thank the Chair, the Bureau, and all involved parties for their efforts and hard work. We also welcome Claudia Mahler in her new role as independent expert, congratulate her for her data gap and COVID-19 reports, and wish her all the best for her upcoming work. This year, despite the pandemic, it is important to keep in mind that other areas still need our full attention. Therefore, we are looking forward to hear and learn from other member states and the civil society about their efforts concerning the right to work and access to the labor market, as well as the experiences on access to justice. Let me briefly reflect on Austria's achievements in these matters. Austria has passed numerous legal provisions and regulations that relate to the employment of older workers. This includes financial incentives such as targeted subsidies for entrepreneurs, relief for social security contributions, or special protective mechanisms such as an increased protection against dismissal and protection against discrimination of older workers, as well as legal consequences if they are disregarded. Access to justice for older persons has a strong tradition in Austria. With the Senior Citizen Council, Austria has established a federal consultative body representing the interests of older persons. This institution is, by law, part in parliamentary discussions and offers a direct service for senior citizens to elaborate legal concerns, requests, or raising awareness on age-related problems. We look forward to learn more about existing and evolving normative gaps in the current human rights legislation. Ageism, digital exclusion, or underrepresentation are vivid realities, and we need to learn from each other how to minimize the negative effects. We are pleased to support a side event together with our German colleagues and experts from the OHCHR that look exactly at these crossroads with an updated OHCHR analysis paper on normative gaps. Of course, we invite all of you to join us at the side event, and we hope for rich discussions. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the work that is done on the regional levels, especially the current efforts of the Standing Working Group on Aging at the UNECE. Although their center of work does not circulate around human rights instruments, their expertise and work is highly linked to many questions we pose in this working group. I'm looking forward to learn more about their work and upcoming challenges. In that sense, I wish us all fruitful discussions and a successful conference. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the delegate of Austria for his statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Edmundo Martinho, Chairman of Santa Casa de Misericordia and National Representative and Chair of the Working Group on Aging of UNECE of Portugal.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me in this meeting. And I would like to start by congratulating the open-ended working group for the work that has been performed so far and that has helped us all in putting aging on the top of the agenda. And on behalf of Portugal, and in particular of the Minister of Labour, Social Security and Solidarity, I would like to congratulate you once again for your work. Thank you so much. And I would like to say that the transformative change required to adapt societies to the implications of population aging and living longer, and especially to meet the needs and rights of older persons, cannot be achieved without a coordinated all of government and all of society effort. For this reason, Portugal has been actively engaged in promoting mainstreaming aging as a central strategy for age-related policies. In December, together with Germany and Slovenia, who hold the presidency of the Council of the European Union between July 2020 and December 2021, presented a trio declaration on aging. This declaration called unequivocally for mainstreaming aging in all policy fields, so that we can help societies and economies to adapt appropriately to demographic change. Under the current Portuguese presidency, the Council of the European Union adopted Council conclusions on mainstreaming aging in public policies earlier in March. They encourage countries to develop national strategic frameworks for mainstreaming aging. At the same time, the new guidelines for mainstreaming aging that have been launched also early in March by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe and its Standing Working Group on Aging provide step-by-step guidance on how to do this, building on stakeholder engagement through age-sensitive research, analysis and impact assessments, cross-sectorial coordination, as well as alignment with relevant international frameworks. Mainstreaming aging encourages a coherent and holistic policy approach to aging that considers aging from both a societal and individual perspective, that at the same time is gender responsive and, of course, most important of all, human rights based, and addresses the needs of all generations, enabling smooth transitions of individuals through different phases of their lives. The COVID-19 pandemic has put a particular spotlight on the importance of mainstreaming aging, and has highlighted the importance of cross-sectoral coordination, notably between health and social care sectors, ensuring that government measures can respond effectively to the specific needs and rights of all citizens, including the most vulnerable. This is our commitment, this is our main ambition that we can contribute for a society where age is no longer a factor of exclusion, but on the contrary, that age and older persons are taken into full consideration in what regards participation, the fruition of their rights, and especially their contribution to society. That's our commitment, that's our ambition, and thank you again to the open-ended working group, and congratulations for your work, and thank you for your attention.
Agradecemos al representante.
I thank the representative of Portugal for his statement. We will now hear a video from Madam Orania Morales, head of the Department of Policy and Program Management of the Ministry of Local Development of El Salvador. We'd like to greet countries, organizations, the United Nations agencies, and everyone participating in this 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. For the government of El Salvador to participate in this kind of forum is an opportunity to promote and ensure the rights of older persons across the board from a human rights perspective, and recognizing their leading role, the leading role that older persons have in progressing towards a more inclusive country of well-being. El Salvador has been a promoter of active aging at various times. We have recognized as key instruments the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, the Inter-American Convention for the Protection of the Human Rights of Older Persons, the Sustainable Development Agenda, and the 2030 Agenda. And now we believe and we are convinced that it's also important to advance towards a convention within the United Nations system in favor of the rights of older persons. Within the National Council for Comprehensive Care Programs for older persons in El Salvador, we're working to improve conditions for older persons living particularly in situations of vulnerability. We have great challenges ahead of us, and all of these instruments, however, show us the way forward and point out to us where we need to focus our efforts. We are working on a Plan of Action 2021-2024 in order to embody our actions in favor of the older person population. In this regard, we believe it's important to resume the processes of intergovernmental negotiation in order to have the necessary recommendations for countries, for the region, and for the entire United Nations system, providing those guidelines and agreements that we need in order to move towards the well-being of the older person population throughout the world. Thank you very much. We thank the distinguished representative of El Salvador, and we now give the floor via video to Madam Choi Young-ai, Chairperson of the National Human Rights Institution of the Republic of Korea.
It is my pleasure to meet you virtually at the 11th session of Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. I would like to begin by thanking the Bureau, the UN Secretary and member states for organizing this meeting in spite of difficult circumstances due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Before this meeting, last December, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea organized the NHRI 2020 Conference on the Rights of Older Persons. At the conference, participants from national human rights institutions, international organizations, including the UN and civil society, came together and shared their experience and expertise. At the conference, Michelle Bachelet, Commissioner for Human Rights, noted that the existing legal system fails to provide adequate protection for the dignity and rights of older persons, both socially and economically. She also emphasized the critical role of the working group in strengthening international human rights mechanisms for older persons. It is regrettable that the working group has not been able to produce tangible outcomes over the past decade. Despite its efforts, it is essential for the working group to yield intergovernmental recommendations and at earlier date for the establishment of a substantial protection mechanisms. The National Human Rights Commission of Korea is proud to call attention to the issues relating to the rights of older persons and facility discussions at home and abroad as chair of the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions Working Group on Aging. I would like to thank colleagues for their hard work to promote the rights of older persons. The Commission remains committed to making progress of the rights of older persons. I look forward to productive discussions at the meeting over the next 4 days and effective measures as a result. Thank you.
Agradecemos a la distinguida.
I thank the distinguished representative of Korea for her statement, and we're going now via video to hear from His Excellency Mr. Guillermo Fernandez de Soto, Permanent Representative of Colombia. Madam Chair, Colombia has approximately 7 million people over the age of 60, which represents 13.5% of our population. The COVID-19 pandemic has accentuated in the region the inequalities and poverty that we've been suffering from. For Colombia, a sustainable recovery with a focus on the most vulnerable population requires greater cooperation and international solidarity. We recognize and support the work carried out by the United Nations and the World Health Organization in order to provide effective and coordinated responses. I'd like to tell you now about some of the concrete actions that have demonstrated my country's commitment in this area. The National Development Plan, entitled Compact for Colombia, Compact for Fairness, paid particular attention to this in the chapter entitled Dignity and Happiness for All Older Persons. This incorporates strategies for social inclusion aimed at promoting opportunities for income, access to health services, care, education, training of human capital, food security, housing, and decent work. In the context of the current health emergency, Colombia has adopted and disseminated various resolutions, guides, and recommendations aimed at guaranteeing the comprehensive care of older persons in a timely manner. And we have finalized the vaccination of adults over 80, and we have already begun the second stage, which is vaccination of those between 60 and 79 years old. We also approved Law 2040 of 2020 to promote the independence and economic self-sufficiency of older persons. We are implementing a program for labor inclusion and decent work, as well as generation of income, promotion of productive change, urban and rural. We've generated various legal tools and virtual fora to provide updates on the protection of the rights of older persons with a focus on gender and disabilities. Madam Chair, I'd like to encourage the group to continue working to draft a globally binding instrument which will make it possible to increase the protection of the rights of older persons. Colombia will not fail in our commitment towards an active and healthy old age. In the words of the writer and political philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, youth is the time to study wisdom, old age is the time to practice it. Thank you very much. We thank the distinguished representative of Colombia for his statement, and we're now going to hear from Excellency Tirumurti, Permanent Representative of India.
Madam Chair, let me begin by congratulating you for your election as the chair of the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group. The aging of world population is one of the most challenging phenomenon of demographic transition in the 21st century. India is home to over 135 million old persons, and this population segment is expected to reach nearly 20% of our population in 2050. The adoption of the 2002 Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging provides a roadmap for addressing challenges of an aging society and realization of human rights of older persons. In line with our commitments, we have undertaken a number of legislative and policy measures to promote social, economic, and emotional security for the elderly. Madam Chair, the well-being of senior citizens is mandated in the Constitution of India, which enjoins on the state to make effective provision for securing the right to work and to public assistance in cases of old age. India has adopted a multi-stakeholder approach to enable elderly to lead a secure, dignified, and productive life. In 2020, the National Action Plan for the Welfare of Senior Citizens was launched that addresses the needs of older persons holistically, with special emphasis on 4 basic needs, which is financial security, food, healthcare, and a life of dignity. The national policy on older persons provides state support for financial and food security, healthcare, shelter, and protection against exploitation. The National Program for Health Care of Elderly provides for improved health services. The Integrated Program for Senior Citizens and Senior Citizen Welfare Fund facilitate intersectoral coordination between central government and the state governments. There are also provisions for institutional support to widows and older women in vulnerable situations. The Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act of 2007 has made care, maintenance, and well-being of parents by their children obligatory and justiciable. In case of abuse, the Act provides the older adults the right to approach a dedicated tribunal. Non-governmental organizations and informal groups have played an increasingly important role in India in providing a security net for senior citizens, supplementing what the family provides in keeping with our long-standing traditions. These NGOs are particularly relevant in urban areas where chances of abuse are much more. We appreciate the role of these NGOs in protection and promoting the rights of older people. We have accorded priority to lifelong learning and formulated guidelines to facilitate participation of adult learners in the university system. Madam Chair, India is firmly committed to protecting, caring, and providing for the welfare and the well-being of its elderly. I thank you.
De la mañana.
I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Spain, His Excellency Mr. Agustin Santos Maravilla, via video. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Bureau, on behalf of the Government of Spain, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity that you've provided us with to participate in this session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. Although the activity of this group has always been important, it's particularly so this year given the COVID-19 pandemic, which has focused on the care and attention given to older persons. They have been one of the groups most affected by the pandemic, both by the pandemic as well as by the collateral effects associated with the pandemic. Loneliness, isolation, stigmatization, amongst other things. And that's why, always looking for their well-being, the Government of Spain, working together with the autonomous communities, local bodies and civil society, has strengthened our commitment to older persons. This commitment has been translated in coordinated action together with our partners in the European Union in the priority vaccination strategy for older persons as a group of that are particularly vulnerable. Also, in coordination with the European Union, we are developing a framework for the establishment of projects and policies that are ambitious and favour the older persons, and which will have the support of the European Union through the European Union Mechanism for Recovery and Resilience. The Institute for Older Persons and Social Services of Spain, IMERSO, is also planning to and implementing these policies. IMSERSO is working within the Ministry for Social Rights and the 2030 Agenda. Putting IMSERSO in this ministerial department corresponds to Spain's commitment to guarantee these rights, which form part of the social policy and principles of our country, including the protection and guarantee of the rights of older persons. The government of Spain, amongst its priorities, has the strategic development of social rights, and amongst them driving forward a system for the independence and care of dependency. On the 19th of March, we signed an agreement putting into effect a plan for independence, strengthening care for older persons. This emergency plan required extra funding, 600 million additional euros, dedicated to personal autonomy and care for dependency. Also, this plan has 3 pillars: reducing the waiting lists and the processing times for requests, applications, ensuring the correct labour conditions for those working in the system, and finally, an improvement in services to guarantee adequate care for dependent persons. The fact that the ministerial department within which IMSERSO works also has competence for the 2030 Agenda shows the important commitment that Spain has to the United Nations action in this area, particularly in favour of older persons. Always, but at this emergency time in particular, the defence of social rights is one of the priorities of the government of Spain, working for the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, ensuring that no one is left behind. Thank you very much. We thank the representative of Spain, and I'd like to make 2 recommendations before we conclude our work for this morning. The first is to bear in mind the quorum for this afternoon. We need to have a quorum in order to define the situation with regard to the NGOs. That's one thing. And then, on the other hand, what's normally said when we conclude meetings, I'd like to call the attention of members to the letter circulated on the 26th of February 2021, which has information regarding the occupational safety and health plan for this meeting, including in the possibility of follow-up in the unfortunate and hopefully unlikely event of a case of COVID-19. Following the arrangements in recent meetings, the Secretariat will actively manage the exit by calling each row for departure in a staggered manner. Members are therefore requested to remain seated after the adjournment of the meeting. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.